Nosferatu was just okay. As an aesthetic experience, it was like 11 out of 10. If you're just looking for kind of a Halloween vampire experience of sound effects and vampires and people just being scared in the dark and having candles and wearing those old-timey suits and stuff like that, you're going to get exactly what you want, 1,000,000% totally satisfied. It is the most vampire-y, gothy movie I've seen in a long time, and it really satisfies anyone who's interested in that kind of look and just soaking in that vibe. And as a part of vampire mythology and as a continuation of the Nosferatu character or the Dracula character, it was also interesting in one or two ways, but I think it fell short of being an actually super exciting film. The story was kind of weak and kind of simple, and even though it had a bunch of super interesting things in it, it didn't really do a ton with them. Things were basically pretty simple, and then they ended in a pretty simple way. And I guess it's surprising to me because everything else in this was so good that it was surprising that the plot, of all things, fell a little short. It could be that they were just doing that because they wanted it to be much more like the original. The original was probably pretty simple, so it would make sense that they would just maybe try and hew to the original in terms of its story beats. But it fell a little short for me, and I wouldn't really recommend it to someone just looking to see a cracking good movie. I think the average person who's not super interested in this genre would come away and say, that was okay, I guess. I mean, that was kind of scary and gross and messed up, but I didn't really get a lot besides that. I'd say it lives up to the hype of its marketing in terms of just looking scary and kind of being disturbing and weird and leaving you things to talk about, but its plot does not match the rest of its elements. But that's okay. That's just how it works out. I think, now that I've seen a few of his films, that the director is someone who really does just make films like this. He makes films that are an aesthetic experience, and they're about what you see and what kind of vibe is imparted by your being immersed in this aesthetic, in this world. And if that's the type of film you want to make, then it works for you, and if people like it, then it works for them. So, nothing wrong with any of that. If you're someone who watched the film and wants to watch more of it, I would recommend actually reading American Vampire, because it is something that reminds me a lot of this film, but that manages to actually, I think, quite frequently have interesting plot developments that are more interesting than what was in this film. I think a lot of vampire stories are about desire and sexual desire, and this entry especially was explicitly about sexual desire alongside the other vampire desires. And that makes it bold and exciting and modern for kind of making it more text instead of just subtext. But I wish they'd gone a little farther with it, and I think American Vampire does do that because it advances the idea of the vampire from just a creature who's associated with blood and makes it explicit and talks about it in terms of, sex. Talks about it with a little less repression than maybe earlier vampire mythology. And it's frank about it and says, it's a metaphor, but also it's alongside regular desire. And it shows then, with that lack of repression, a few different takes on how it can turn out. And so you have a villainous character who is unrepentant and abusive. Then you have in-between characters who kind of dance back and forth between being ethical or being unethical. And then we have more heroic characters who can find a way to coexist with their desire, however you want to define it. And so it becomes this interesting world where vampirism is a metaphor for sex, but also just part of the world, but also a metaphor for morality in general. People have a choice in how they choose to go around satisfying themselves, and you get invested in seeing what they'll do and whether they'll find success in this battle with their code of conduct. And that is something that transmits to real life, because we also have our own choices about our conduct and how we satisfy our desires of all kinds. And so the metaphor is potent and relevant and powerful. That said, not all of American Vampire is good. Please don't assume it's all amazing just based on me saying it. Make your own decisions about what you want to read.